east of the Jordan, and definitely from around Hebron. And then they got driven out, not destroyed for the most part, but driven out. And it appears that they made their home among the Philistines. So this is now several hundred years later, and it makes sense that Goliath would refer to himself as a Philistine, and that he would be called a Philistine. They're fully assimilated, but genetically, they weren't Philistines. They didn't come from Caftor or Crete. They came from the east, the south. Good time. All right. So I got to see if I can do it. All right.
They'll see you, but you can't see that they see you. And there's your slides there and your notes.
I can never see that they see me. So that's okay. That is okay. So last week, we ended more or less on this slide, that where Moses in Deuteronomy is, again, telling the people at the end of the wilderness wanderings, he's saying, don't be like your parents. He says you here, but he's really talking about their parents. You were unwilling to go up. You rebelled against the Lord. You grumbled in your tents. And why is that? See at the end of that first paragraph, you probably can't, maybe you can see up there, maybe not. We even saw the Anakites there. So they were afraid. They were afraid. And the language that's used is very strong. They were afraid of the giants, and so they rebelled. They rebelled. Now, when we think about our own giants, and we'll do that some this morning, when we think about our own giants and we're afraid and we just can't do it, Lord, I just can't do it. Is that rebellion? I don't know. Something to think about. So anyway, moving on now to more about Goliath. I'll just go ahead and read these because it might be a little small for everybody to see. A couple of things it says in 1 Samuel 17 about Goliath. It says a champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. And then a little later in the chapter, it says, when the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran. Does that language, a champion and a hero, ring any bells? We're thinking about giants. No. Okay. Well, the very first time the word giants is mentioned in the Bible, back in Genesis 6, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards. When the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them, they were the heroes of old, men of renown. That's kind of a neutral thing. We don't know whether that's good or bad, but we kind of take it as being a bad thing as a general rule. Just a thought, just something that my mind went to, unlike anybody else's. When I saw the words champion and hero, I went back to that verse. Now, Goliath had a helmet of bronze and a coat of bronze mail that weighed about 125 pounds. He had a shield of bronze on his legs, shields of bronze on his legs. And he's covered in bronze from head to toe. The word for bronze, the Hebrew word, is nehoshet. And that sounds a lot like the Hebrew word for serpent, which is naheesh. It also sounds real similar to something else. Is that the name, David, you're nodding your head? What's that?
I think the nehoshet.
Oh, nehoshet? No. How about Nehushtan? which was what the bronze serpent ended up being called by the days of Hezekiah. That was it, that bronze thing or something. So here we have a giant covered in bronze. So really, what better representation of sin as an enemy could we possibly have? A giant, a Philistine covered in bronze. And he's scary on top of that, like our giants are. So now this giant super soldier would come out in the field and he would mock God every day. So is there any symbolic meaning to what Goliath says, his taunt? 1 Samuel 17:8 says, Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man and let him come down to me. If he's able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us. Then the Philistines said, this day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other. Perry.
It makes me think of, I think it's Romans 8, where it says you're no longer servants of sin because of, the work of Christ. And when you look at it through that lens of Christ overcoming sin and freeing everybody else, it fits perfectly with what Goliath says just now.
Yeah, don't we have one man who defeated sin and certainly defeated his giant on our behalf? I think that's, and we're going to see more too.
Can I say something too?
Yeah.
It's interesting the concept of like fear of the giants, and I think fear as a theme throughout the Bible is associated with sin or wavering, faltering.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you jump to the end of the Bible in 1 John, that's that passage. 1 John 4 is a passage about God's love being with us and being applied to that love. It's very concrete there. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear hath torment, neither fear is not made perfect in love. So having that love and that courage is part of that thing kind of associated there. We have to be able to, what we're saying, I think with all of us, be able to see beyond physical.
Exactly. And really it is all about perception. We struggle to see past what we can see and what we're experiencing and what our giants are doing to us. But if we look at Goliath, and this we have to be careful, because it's really easy to take God out of the equation. And look at it a different way, and we're going to see that some here this morning. Both armies saw only strength and invincibility. The Philistines said, here's our champion, here's our hero, he's invincible. The army of Israel was scared to death of this one guy. But if Goliath was a product of acromegaly, then he would have had osteoarthritis. He would have had an enlarged heart. He would have had sleep apnea, so he'd have been exhausted all the time. He'd have had nerve damage, and he'd have had poor eyesight. And in fact, why did he need an armor bearer? Yeah.
So I was wondering that too. This armor, this little guy between his legs.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's interesting because we don't have any to like. It just says he's basically claiming to be a champion when we don't have any kind of background for
says, oh yeah, and they went to battle and Goliath, you know, like we hear about Samson, so like you tell them women, we don't hear stories like that. So, you know, he was he might have just looked good.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's exactly what it was. He was this huge, imposing character, but he probably couldn't move and he couldn't see. And that's what the armor bearer was. The armor bearer may have been his eyes.
Yeah, in sports, they call that first off the bus. Yeah, they say he might not be a very good football player, but he's the biggest guy in most people.
Yeah.
The team would get off.
Right. Yeah. First off the bus. Yeah. Uh-huh.
You said our giants, does that mean like sin and intervention or something?
What scares you? Whatever it is that scares you is your giant.
Okay.
And we'll talk about that a little bit more here today.
It seemed like other people had some bear, Saul had.
Mhm.
So I don't really know much about them or what their purpose was, but it seemed like it might be a standard thing for major military figures to have an armor bearer.
Yeah, that's true. It made sense. You're right. He's not the only person to have an armor bearer. But, you know, this was supposed to be a one-on-one confrontation. Wait a minute. This doesn't seem fair. Perry.
In Jonathan's case, the guy that his armor bearer would come through and put a sledgehammer through the skulls and whoever he wounded.
Yeah.
And so that's, you know, what Jonathan's armor bearer did. Yeah, I like to keep Goliath as a fully functioning champion rather than downplay.
Yeah.
Because sin is something that really, without Christ, is the ultimate.
Yeah. So if he was fully functioning, you're right. That seems like a good way to think of him. Unique, genetically unique, not something we could see anymore today.
And to be fair, I missed your class when you went through the genetics of all of this and stuff. But I would just say that whatever giants we have today are sort of freak spin-offs of all the people that we see around us. But these guys could have been a different line that's wiped out. So they could have been fully functioning. I would like to think.
Could be, yeah. Today, everybody's a result of a pituitary tumor, and it's a problem.
Right.
Yeah.
We were in South America some years ago, and there was this sale among some of the Amazonian tribes that some of the tribes actually just reserved protein for they were the ruling class or whatever, and just a high protein diet in a where everyone else didn't have protein can make a tremendous difference in the size of human beings. And if you just look at the different races that exist on the earth, you can see a pretty good evidence of that.
Yeah.
So maybe they were just really big people and had a line of big people and weren't necessarily victims of a pituitary.
Yeah, although Goliath is described as being somewhere in the neighborhood of 9.5 feet tall. So that's
But that kind of depends on what you think.
Yeah, generally somewhere between 18 and 20 inches is a cubit. Right. David.
Are you going to get into the concept where he says, Goliath says, if you conquer me, we'll be your servants, but if I conquer you, you're going to be my servant?
No.
Well, interesting that once Jesus defeated sin, when you get to Romans 6, Paul says, know ye not that to whom ye yield yourselves servants to obey, his servants you are, whom you obey, whether of sin and death or of obedience and righteousness. And then in verse 18 it says, being then made free from sin, you became the servants of righteousness. And in verse 20, but when you were the servants of sin, you were free from righteousness. So Paul's saying we've been free from, they were slaves to sin. And now Christ has destroyed that giant there. And so now we're no longer, we've been free there. That's if he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. And that sin is no, I mean, sin's, we're no longer slaves to sin anymore. And in kind of, in Hebrews, it says, let's see, for as much then as the children are partakers of flesh and blood, he also himself likewise did the same, that through death he might destroy him that had the power of death, and is the devil. So, that taunt that Goliath is
Right.
fulfilled.
Right. Yeah. And true as that is, it's hard for us to accept sometimes and to fully buy into that some aspects of sin in this world are scary. And they scare us, and we just can't. Yeah. Scott.
David takes the head of Goliath and hangs it on the wall.
Yeah, that's what we're going to talk about next. Yeah, we're talking about that next. So back to perception here a little bit. Everybody else is thinking hand-to-hand combat, right? Everybody's thinking, I can't take on this guy. If he gets his hand on me, I'm dead. But David didn't see it that way. We know everything he said about God protecting him. But he didn't engage Goliath in close quarters. He stood well back and slung a stone. And he used the whole valley as his battlefield. And so we have this drawing courtesy of Perry. Now, I think he's standing a little close. And we do see a guy in the background, maybe one of the other 4 giants that David's family members took on later in the story. But yeah, Scott, David then struck Goliath in the head, and he cut off his head. And this is a shadow of Jesus striking the serpent in the head. And what did David then do with Goliath's head? It says, David took the Philistine's head and brought it to Jerusalem. He put the Philistines' weapons in his own tent. I don't know if there's any significance to that, but I want to focus on he took the Philistines' head to Jerusalem, which is about 17 miles away from where this battle took place. About 17 miles both to get to Jerusalem and to get to Bethlehem. But why would he take it there? He didn't take it home, but instead he took it to a city that Israel didn't even own yet.
Because he understood what went on with Abraham. And that's why he became one of that city. Because that's where sin would be feeding.
Yeah, that's a really good point that I didn't even think about it from the perspective of he understood the history with Abraham, and this is where Abraham sacrificed Isaac. That's the significance of Jerusalem. I was thinking of it from a more human, pragmatic kind of perspective, and that is, Jerusalem and Bethlehem are really close by each other. And the Jebusites still controlled Jerusalem. And so the Jebusites would have been the enemy that, because he grew up in Bethlehem, that he would have been most closely affected by. And so he puts, it's generally believed that he put Goliath's head on a pike, planted that pike in the ground outside Jerusalem, and basically said, Jebusites, you're next. Because you are the next thing in my life that is defying the armies of the living God. Now,
It says he brought to Saul. Saul reigned in Jerusalem.
no,
Well, I wouldn't say it's 100% convincing he took it to Jerusalem.
To stay?
That's what's being implied, that he left.
Can you read that reference, Randy?
Verse 57, David returned from slaughter of the Philistine, after took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine prince.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, you're right. He must not have left it. But he ran 17 miles one way with this giant head, did something with it there, and then brought it back. Now this brings us, believe it or not, to Golgotha, which is a hill located just outside of the city walls of Jerusalem. And it means a place of the skull. Not only does it look like a skull, supposedly, but it's generally, I know what you said, Randy, that he brought it back, gave it to Saul, but some also believe that David buried Goliath's head there. Whether or not he did doesn't really matter. But he did bring it to Jerusalem to say something to the Jebusites, presumably. But also the Aramaic Golgotha sounds like a contraction of the Aramaic Goliath of Gath. Golgotha, Goliath of Gath, but in Aramaic. Whatever David's reasons are for bringing the skull here, and whether he left it or not, it's remarkable that God uses it at the death of his son. That this connection is made at the place of the giant's head. Jesus struck the head of the serpent and killed it. Just for interest's sake, Golgotha is located just outside Jerusalem, and there are two main contending sites for it. The first one, if you look at that lower left, the lower red dot, this is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and since the 4th century, it's been held that that's the site, and it was outside the city walls at that time, and it's the location of a quarry. But the other site, the one up at the top there, also outside the city walls. It was identified by a Major General Charles Gordon in 1883 because the hill looks kind of like a skull. If you can see that there, you maybe can see 2 eyes and a nose. But it's now believed that that's a result of quarrying. It's not a natural feature, so I don't know.
In the end of Ezekiel, when we talk about the temple in the future, the slaughtering blocks and everything on the temple is set up on the northern side. And all the maps I've ever seen had Golgotha on the north side of the other city, like up there.
Yeah, they're both on the north.
Yeah.
That blue area is the old city. Yeah. So that fits too, on the north. Okay, well, so let's talk about us for very little time. Do we have any counterparts to these giants? You know, we've talked about Philistines, and the Philistines were these thorn in Israel's side for hundreds and hundreds of years. They were not listed among the 10 nations to be driven out, or 7 nations to be driven out. They were just always there. And do we have a counterpart to that? These Philistines, not the giants first. You know, we've got this reference in Judges 3, 1 through 6 that says, these are the nations the Lord left to test all those Israelites who had not experienced any of the wars in Canaan. He did this only to teach warfare to the descendants of the Israelites who had not had previous battle experience. The 5 rulers of the Philistines, all the Canaanites, the Sidonians, the Hivites living in the Lebanon mountains from Mount Baal Hermon to Lebo Hamath, they were left to test the Israelites to see whether they would obey the Lord's commands. And so Israel lived among these people, it says. So is there a correlation between teaching warfare and obeying God? For me, my mind immediately goes to the whole armor of God. Scott, did you?
I think you're probably talking to me, but I think it sums it up right there. They took the daughters of marriage and gave their own daughters to their sons to serve their God. So there is accounted for to some degree. Be holy as I am holy. It's pretty, I don't know, specific or clear, but we're supposed to have marriage relationships among those who are under covenant relationship. And you see destruction occur often when that isn't followed. Right. Throw that out there, because that's what the scripture says. And that's the lesson that's trying to teach us, I think.
Yeah, that's certainly part of it. Yeah. But it's interesting, you know, we get the impression that it was Israel's fault. They didn't follow through sufficiently to destroy all of these people. But we get a different message here, Judges 3. God left them to test them, to teach them warfare, to see whether they would obey.
We're in the world that we're surrounded by challenges constantly.
Yeah. Exactly. You know, these Philistines, I don't know whether we can really draw a distinction between Philistines and giants, but I like to think so. And that is, the distinction is that giants are those scary things in our lives that we want God to just take away from us, and we're scared of them. Make it end. The Philistines, on the other hand, are constant thorns. Their sin and their thorns. And they're always there. Always. They're never going to be driven out. They're there to test us, to see whether we'll obey. Yeah.
If we think of it in the light of the kingdom age in the 7,000th year of 2 Samuel 21 at the very end there says, verse 20, 21. And when he had defied Israel, Jonathan and the son of Shimea, the brother of David, slew him. This was a giant. And the 4 were born to the giant in Gath and fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servant. So, you know, it sets up the Christ overcame the giant in his own life. And then, of course, we overcome the giants in our lives when we get immortality and the twinkling of an eye, the judgment. But then for 1,000 years, we have Philistines running around, so to speak, where sin exists in the world, but not to the extent that it used to. And eventually all sin, all giants are destroyed.
Yeah.
Eventually.
And they won't affect us anyway. Well, you know, I've read a couple of books about giants in our lives. One of them is from a Christian perspective. The other, interestingly, uses David and Goliath as a jumping off point, but then is really very humanist. And this author is the one where I got this notion of David really seeing Goliath with all his weaknesses that he had. This giant was loaded with weaknesses because he was a pituitary case. And he also looked at it and said, well, I'm not going to let him grab me, but I can, bam. And where were all the others? David wasn't the only person in Israel who could sling a stone. but somehow nobody else ever thought of that. And so there's this humanist way of looking at giants. Let me just give you one or two examples. The loss of a parent is a terrible thing, and that would be a giant for someone to grow up with. Maybe not a scary thing, but it would be a huge hurdle to overcome, to grow up with the loss of a parent. But a study was conducted in the 1960s, and it showed that 45% of the eminent people throughout history, 45% of them had lost a parent in their childhood. 67% of British prime ministers had lost a parent before they were 16. 12 of the first 44 US presidents had lost fathers when they were young. So, you know, that does something to a person. Yeah, a huge percentage of people who are incarcerated had also lost a parent in childhood. So it does something to you, but you can choose what it does, perhaps. One other example, dyslexia. Nobody would wish that on their child. Nobody would wish dyslexia on their child, but it turns out that 1/3 of very successful entrepreneurs are dyslexic. A third. Richard Branson, Charles Schwab, the founders of JetBlue and Cisco and Kinko's. But when asked, none of them would wish dyslexia on their kids. So again, maybe not a scary thing, but a difficult thing to overcome, but it wires their brain differently. They have to think differently to succeed in life. And so, you know, we look at these things and we say, is this, whether it's the death of a parent, whether it's a condition like dyslexia, is that we look at that and say, that's God molding us. But it's real easy to look at it and say, it's a, you know, from a humanist perspective.
I'm just thinking about, you know, if Goliath is within sin, and the method of combat that David posed, you know, he didn't get, obviously you have to get partly part of the way to actually even get the rock going, right? You can't be too close. It's not gonna get enough velocity and you're not gonna be able to get it off. So you have to be away from it. And I think maybe there's a little bit of a lesson in that we don't want to get, we can see sin, right? You don't want to do hand-to-hand combat with sin.
Right.
You want to stay away from it.
Yeah.
Potent things in the word that can help us to go the darks.
We can combat it better. We can maybe get a better perspective on our giants if we can somehow step back. Yeah.
You don't get so close.
Right. One closing thought about giants. You know, when we talk about the things that scare us, that threaten us, that we are just so afraid of, what language do we use? Do we see the power and talk about the power of that scary thing? Or do we talk about the power of God to overcome it? When David was talking about Goliath, what language did he use?
Javelin and spear, but I come to you in the name
The living God. Yeah. Well, here we go. 1 Samuel 17. The armies of the living God, the armies of the living God, the Lord that delivered me, he will deliver me. I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel. This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand. There is a God in Israel. The Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. He's not looking at Goliath and being scared of him. He's looking at Goliath and saying, God is stronger. God's going to take care of it. And he was 17-ish. Crazy. All right, just want to show you those two books. There's this David and Goliath by Malcolm Gladwell. He's the one who looks at things from this very humanist perspective. But then there's Facing Your Giants by Max Lucado. I'd recommend that one if you're interested. And thank you very much. All set.
Thank you, Casey.